Hi, everybody. It's Kira. I'm the teen librarian for Pueblo County Library District, City, County. Sorry. And today is the time when I give my book talk. So, hello. If you haven't seen me recently, you will see that my hairs are all shorter, which makes me happy. Today, though, I'm a little bit tired. I had one of those irritating things you have to do with cars. It didn't go as I pleased. This was about registering a car, and I hadn't done this step that I thought I could do there. Anyway, now I'll be doing it in July because that's the next time that I could get an appointment. But you know what? I'm not going to sweat it. I'll do the thing I need to do, and then I'll put all the papers together, and I'll put them away, and I will just relax until July comes. Anyway, this is what happens when you move from another state. And it's during a pandemic, so everything takes way longer. The book I am going to, I have an itchy eye. So I'm not wearing my mask. That's because I'm alone in this room. Just so you know. Tomorrow I get my second vaccination jab, though. I am really excited, even though I'll keep wearing my mask all the time, but still, it'll give me a little peace of mind. Yeah, so anyway, on to the book. The book I am introducing today is called Everything Sad is Untrue, A True Story by Daniel Nayeri. Now, straight up honest with you, this is cataloged as a JFIC, which generally thought, that's for, that's tweens, that's sort of middle school age. But here comes my little story. I saw this author during a webinar I was watching, and he was talking about the book, and I was totally intrigued and fascinated. And so I went and looked it up, and I checked it out. And then I also just, went on, checked out the reviews. And this book, when it first came out, was getting crazily rave reviews from across the board. So I'm going to read you little bits of them, and two are from major newspapers. The others are from some of the key sort of book reviews that librarians look at when they're deciding where to order books from, which books to order. So from the New York Times, I believe this was in the New York Times book review, quote, "A love letter to storytelling." And then went on and on. And then the next piece, "A modern masterpiece, as epic as the Iliad and Shahnameh, and as heartwarming as Charlotte's Web." From the Wall Street Journal, "Supple, sparkling, and original." Okay, now we're getting into the big review publications that librarians use to decide, we have to decide what books to buy. Well, I don't. That's not my role as a librarian, but I do put in lots of suggestions. Anyway, you don't need to know about that. But generally, librarians go to these when there are tons of books coming out all the time. You can't buy all of them. So we go to these review sources to see what early reviewers have to say. So from Kirkus Reviews, "A Modern Epic." From Booklist, "A Journey as Intimate as it is Epic." From Publishers Weekly, a distinctive voice, a rare treasure of a book." And then there's some that are less famous, but still pretty famous. They're just not like the first go-tos. From BCCB, "A Story That Soars. Readers will be transported." From Forward Reviews, "Poignant and powerful, a story of heartbreak and resilience." From Bookpage, "One of the most extraordinary books of the year." And then I just found this one, Linda Sue Park, who won Newbery, said, like nothing else you've read or ever will read. And now, having read this book, I can say that I think everyone should read it. I don't care how old they are. I mean, if they're capable of reading it, right? I'm not saying littles should read it because they couldn't, but teens should read this book. Adults should read this book. It is a modern epic, and it's very readable, but there's a lot there. I mean, okay, so I used to be a scholar and on my way to becoming a verified scholar. I was in a PhD program. I got sick. You don't need to know the story. But that was my world. And this book absolutely lends itself to that kind of study. It could be studied for many reasons and in many dimensions, including its form. So this is a great book, and I encourage tweens to read it. I encourage teens to read it. I encourage adults to read it. Okay? So what's it about? And why might it be interesting to read? Well, the book is narrated by, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Khusro Nayeri, whose mother basically changed his name to Daniel because no one outside Iran could pronounce his first name. And while I regret it, while I'm talking about this book, I'm going to refer to him as Daniel because I am one of those people who can't pronounce it. So just going to give you a little background. So Daniel is 12. He fled his homeland Iran at age 5 or 6. It's not entirely clear. Becoming a refugee with his mother and sister due to the fatwa placed on his mother. She was a doctor who converted to Christianity. It's even more complicated than that, where they get into Sunni versus Shiite and her blood ancestry connected to the Prophet Muhammad, etc. But anyway, when it was discovered that she had converted to Christianity, a fatwa was placed on her head, meaning she would be killed. So they had to beat it, right? Now, if you really want to, and this is something that sort of comes up in the book, like why did she give all of this up? Why didn't she just sort of deny she was a Christian and just go about life, But she was part of an underground church, etc. But she was a doctor, very successful, had a beautiful house with her husband. Literally, they were, I don't know how rich, but they were rich, They had a great, life. But that wasn't her truth. So left age 5 or 6, first managed to get to Dubai, and they were in Dubai homeless until for some amount of time, maybe a year, maybe less than a year, while his mother worked on getting the documents needed. That it was a big pain to get these documents. They had to get them sent from Daniel's father, et cetera, et cetera. And they seem to come up with more and more, and it's just horrible. Anyway, so they were in Dubai, and then they spent 2 years in a refugee camp in Italy. Quite dour. Sorry, my parents are Irish, so you probably say dour. What I mean by that is it was not a fun place at all. And very few people actually spoke Farsi there. Everyone was sort of alienated from each other. But the town did not want the refugees coming into town. generally not a very happy place. And then finally, after 2 years, they were resettled in Oklahoma when he was 8 years old. So since then, in those 4 years, he's mastered English, but he still fails to fit in. He's a brown boy with unruly hair, with a bubble butt, as he calls it. And he's constantly sort of bemused by a lot of Oklahoma culture / American culture. And Persian culture comes up a lot. He discusses Persian culture, especially the notion of being a host and a guest, and how a host is expected to act and how a guest is expected to act. And that just doesn't really exist in the U.S. To the even a fraction of the way it is taken very seriously in Iran. And that's not all. I mean, there's the food, which is the huge issue, going to the bathroom, like toilets are different. I mean, everything. So anyway, but he has mastered English. He's doing very well in school. He does not fit in. So the book is basically, and in the book he addresses the listener / reader with some frequency. And he's standing in front of his middle school class, presenting his research report that they were all assigned on his family history. And his is, what I would imagine, very different from those of the Oklahoma kids. Then almost immediately he invokes Scheherazade in The 1001 Nights, in which good storytelling is Scheherazade's only way to preserve her life from this sort of disturbed, damaged king who will marry someone and then the next morning kill them. So she's just trying to survive by telling these stories and getting him interested enough that he won't kill her. If you don't know that story. And so here's where I'm not going to give a ton away, but I have some notes because there's a lot that goes on. So the stories, the order of the stories that Daniel tells is not linear, sort of in any way. They move between, among other things, I'm going to have a whole list. I've made some notes because there are lots of things that he tells stories about. Persian legends and myths, his experiences in Oklahoma, both painful bullying, both verbal and physical, but also sort of awkward and funny experiences. Also tells stories about Iranian history, sort of trying to make people realize that Iran and Iraq are not the same place at all, and they've actually been at war, et cetera, but that's a difficult message to get across. He talks about his often abusive stepfather, Ray, whose real name is Rahim. Yes, Rahim, who is the only man that Daniel's mother knows in Oklahoma who actually speaks Persian. He's a problematic figure, and one of the issues that I definitely had with this book is with that relationship. And what happens with it. But anyway, moving on. Also, memories and retellings of stories about his grandparents but their loves, their lives, where they lived, what they did, his sister's cleverness. His sister's older than him, but not by a ton, but she's older. His attempts to prove himself worthy to his father, who stayed in Iran without him. His one friend in Oklahoma, he tells stories about that friend. Memories of the schooling that his mother went to extraordinary lengths to obtain for him and his sister while they were in the refugee camp in Italy. And also the teenage Kurd who was scarred by one of Saddam Hussein's chemical weapons, who befriended him in that camp. Much older than him, but befriended him. And they would play soccer together. So at first, these stories don't seem very obviously connected in terms of the order in which he tells them, but themes run throughout sort of groups of stories. And some of those themes are the nature of marriage and love, what people want, what they need, and what they do, both to and for each other, and also storytelling, regret, and hope. So those are a few of the themes that sort of run through. Memory is an important one. So he follows Scheherazade in terms of never stopping at the sort of the end of the story. Always, whether they're stopping for lunch, he needs to stop with a hook that will keep the listener/reader interested until the story resumes. Even though in a book we're reading it, it's great, right? But the notion is that he's delivering this before his classmates, and his classmates interrupt at times and ask questions. Now he's doing this, as Scheherazade was, to preserve himself, because he is fighting against what he calls the shame of the refugee, which is a patchwork story. And the book is, in a sense, a patchwork, but only on the top level is it a patchwork, because he is fighting to preserve his memories. Because if he thinks he loses a memory, or if his memory is not true, then he loses the person that he is remembering. And so he's weaving them together in a way that allows himself to put himself together, to insist on his being, on his voice, on his worthwhile existence, which seems always at risk. To himself. Like he's not afraid he's going to die, but the notion of a worthwhile existence is fragile. And I think that is the experience of a refugee in many ways, because your story is, in fact, so many stories. And so I don't want to give a lot away. There's so much that happens in this book, so many important stories that are connected, and fascinating legends and and stories of his ancestors. And so I don't want to give away any of the stories because they're great. And I don't want to have any spoilers, but I do want to share one short episode. And one of the things he's terrified, he's really, really terrified that the memories he has of his grandparents, and there's particularly, he has a grandfather, he only really has one memory of him. Well, more than one, but they're all from sort of the same trip to see him. And he's terrified that it's a false memory because he was very small. He was at oldest 5, probably 4 or 3. And he finally sort of gathers the strength to ask his mother whether that soul memory of his grandfather is real. And this is sort of a terrifying thing to ask, because if he discovers that it's wrong, then he'll feel like he's lost his grandfather. And while she points out that the memory isn't exactly right, mostly because he's misunderstood some of the circumstances around the memory, which is his grandfather slaughtering a bull. And it's kind of a terrifying memory, like sort of being a little kid and watching this happen. The bull is freaking out, when you're watching your grandfather slit its throat and the blood, and then he remembers his grandfather coming up to him and touching his face. And in the memory, he has blood on his hands. And so Daniel thinks he's killing the bull for the feast, which is for him because it's his first time visiting. Or maybe not his first, but because he's visiting. So his mother sort of corrects him a bit. She tells him that his memory is right, but the bull was not for the feast in honor of him, though that was a sheep. And yes, there was a feast for in honor of him, because he was his grandfather's, and his grandfather loved him very much. But they killed the bull because it was mad, and it wasn't even his grandfather's bull, but the people who worked for him and the people in town knew that he was the only one who could really handle this. And the bull was actually probably going to kill itself because it was bucking wildly and could have broken its own neck. And she also said he would have washed his hands, but yes, he did hold your face. That is a real memory. And so at first he thinks, oh no, I've got it wrong. I've lost my grandfather. But then she makes clear that this memory is real. It's just he doesn't understand the circumstances. And the only part that he got confused about was the blood on the hands. But she also says something to him about the killing of an animal and the killing of the sheep for their feast. She says, then we could eat, only after we understood the cost of joy. And I think this is a remarkable sentence. It both reflects something most Americans don't identify with, though I have met some Americans who. Anyway, but it also reflects his mother's self-sacrificing heroism throughout the book. Her sort of indefatigable resolve as she's led her children through these really intense experiences of suffering in that refugee camp, and yet she never gave up her hope. She was always planning ahead. She wasn't thinking, this is never going to end. She wasn't thinking, this is going to end in some crappy way. She was thinking, I am going to get my children to a place where they will be free to be and become whatever they want. And even in this refugee camp that was isolated from everything, there was nowhere to learn there. She managed to find someone who homeschooled their children, who would allow her children to go and get that school. They had to take a bus for an hour, 2 hours. She saved all of her money to buy erasers because they didn't have the actual workbooks that the kids at home had. So she would just sit at the back and erase all the workbooks, erase them, and then give them to her children so that they could then do the workbooks and learn. And that notion of only then can we eat, after we understand the cost of joy. And she is the character who, more than anyone, accepts the cost of what she wants to give her children. Now, this is also very complicated with her relationship with the stepfather, and that's something. This is true, and Daniel's sister tells him that the reason his mother has married Ray, they divorce and then they remarry, is because she thinks he needs a father figure, and that this gives him a tremendous amount of guilt. But that is his sister's opinion. It's not necessarily the truth. But whatever the reason is, Ray is, as a person reading this today, it bothers me because this woman is so strong. She's a doctor, but they are poor as dirt in Oklahoma. She has to take these sort of like minimum wage jobs at the hospital, like cleaning up after people when she's actually a doctor, but her degree is not recognized in the United States. So they are poor. She sacrifices everything that she has gained herself to get there. Now, as a person reading this in 2021, the relationship with Ray was very troubling to me, and I wanted her to just boot him out the door. But this is a true story. And we don't know what reason she had for being with Ray. Maybe it was companionship, so she could, he wasn't constantly abusive to her. Very rarely is an abusive husband always abusive, right? There is the role of companionship and being able to be married to someone who speaks your language and who has some similar experience. He was also a refugee. Anyway, I don't want to go on and on about that. But I just really love that one part, and I think that this book, it is an epic, and there is so much you can find in it, in all of its layers of its stories, and the bravery in it, the resilience. There is a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering, but it's also funny. And even when, Daniel's sister is basically, tricking him into doing things that then he gets really mad that she's done, and I won't tell you all of them because one of them's pretty gross. But it's also funny, it's a sibling, I have older siblings who did mean stuff like that to me, and it doesn't mean they don't love you. It means they're an older sibling. And there's some really funny parts, and it's really beautiful. And I also just want to stress that, and this is something that Daniel, in giving this presentation, actually talks pretty directly about, and what the book is absolutely insistent upon, is the power of storytelling as the means by which people see each other as human. And as he puts it, like if people were telling stories and knowing each other as humans, you were listening to me and seeing me as I am. If everyone did that, there would be no war. People would see the humanity in others. They would not be cruel and mean. They would love each other. And that's part of why I found this book so tremendous, is because I really have that belief in storytelling, and I really believe that reading allows people to develop empathy, that our society is not really set up anymore to necessarily teach or inform. And we live in a society with too little of it, where people aren't talking to each other, and they see someone, they don't even see someone, they see the typing of someone who disagrees with them, and they hate that person, and they don't actually communicate with them. And our society is a failure of communication in so many ways. And I think that is part of why I love this book, because I do think that telling stories, showing yourself to another through telling stories, your real self, it's hard to hate someone who's doing that, who's showing themselves to you. As hard as it can be to show yourself to someone. That is where love is. And unrelated, but another of my favorite books, which is also a JFIC, but which is probably more obviously a JFIC than this, is The Van of Tolbooth, which is also about communication in a little bit more of a fantasy way. But I adored this book. It's actually quite, I think it's quite complex, but it also is an amazing view into the experience of a refugee, the trauma of a refugee, and the beauty of this kid who is now a man, who is a writer, and a beautiful writer. And I love him, having read this book. So I'm going to tell all of you to read it. I'm about to check it back into the library. It is called Everything Sad is Untrue, a True Story by Daniel Hyeri, the name he took on. So it isn't, it is a true story. I mean, it's a novel, but I don't know whether he gave this talk. I mean, that would blow one's mind. Think about it, 12-year-old being able to talk like this. But he worked on this for most of his life, he says. And I don't know about most of his life. But a long time. And Please read it. Honestly, it's so great. And don't put your nose in the air because it's, a JFIC book. I don't think you can see that because there. Don't put your nose in the air because of that. This is a book that is for any age. I would tell adults to read this book. So, and I will be telling my mother to read it. And my mother reads a lot. She'll probably read it. So yeah, gorgeous book. And yeah, so that's my introduction. And I hope at least one of you out there will check out this book because it's fantastic. And I look forward to seeing what else he writes. I'm not super familiar with him, but this book has made me want to follow up with whatever else he puts out. So that's the end of my book talk. I've had a tiring week. Today was better than the rest of my week. The rest of my week I was feeling kind of down. Had an annoying morning, but annoying, not down. So that's okay. But I'm feeling better today. I hope that all of you are feeling all right. And if you're not, then I hope that you will ask for help. Find an adult you trust and say that you need help dealing with what's happening inside your mind. There's no shame in that. Asking for help is actually very brave because it's scary. It is scary, I know that. It's brave to care about yourself and to love yourself enough to do that. You might not feel like you love yourself. You may feel like you hate yourself and that you don't want to be yourself. But you're worth it. Every single person is worth it. Every single person should love and adore themselves because you are unique and beautiful. And I want to meet you and get to know you. So if you're having trouble, ask for help. Call this hotline. Or, you can call a hotline no matter what. You just have a bad day and you need to talk to somebody about it. Call that hotline. There's no wrong reason to call it. I've also been putting some bookmarks in all the Kits to Go that have a whole bunch of crisis lines. And you can look them up on the internet or on your phone. The Trevor Project, which is for LGBTQ youth, they've got a phone line, a text line, a live chat online. All three. There's a trans lifeline, and that website is amazing. They have a ton of resources. We've got Rape Crisis in Pueblo, which is excellent. We've got sort of a youth dating violence. I want everyone to also love themselves, to know that they deserve a healthy relationship. And there's a teen line where, if you have a problem but you want to talk to another teen, you can call this line and you'll talk to another teen and you guys can brainstorm together about ways to sort out that problem. Anyway, I know I'm going on and on about this, but I just got some more of those bookmarks. I'm going to put some more up in the teen zone upstairs. And, excuse me. So, if you need one, come on by. You can pick one up. There are also some really cool sort of contests going on, and I always put them on the bulletin board there. So check out the bulletin board. And next Thursday, 5:30, come to the Teen Hangout, Turtle Park, which is on the Union Street or Union Ave. I don't know which one it is. The Union side of Rawlings. It's a little more secluded, private. We're going to be hanging out, and first one we're going to do some break-in bags that I'm making. It's kind of like an escape room, except you're breaking in, and there's some goodies in the bag. And I also have they're canvas bags, and I have some fabric markers that I hope you guys will decorate them. So anyway, now that I've promoted my program next Friday, and I have encouraged you to take care of your mental health as well as your physical health, I'm going to sign off and pack up some more kits to go, because in May we've got make your own Baby Yoda felty, little stuffed Baby Yoda that you make all by yourself. It's cool. So that's in May. Still got BristleBots now. So yeah, pick some of those up. Look forward to Baby Yoda. And I'll see you again soon. Take care. We miss you. Okay, bye-bye.